I'm Nick Capone, and this is Cultural Catholicism, an exploration into the existence and significance of the Catholic faith within the culture. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Justin Bonanno. He's an assistant professor at Ave Maria University, where he serves as chair of the Communications and Literature Department. He studies rhetoric, semiotics, and media ecology. Today we speak on quite a bit. There's a lot there. We talk about what rhetoric is, why he studied it and communications and now teaches it, his journey as a Catholic convert. We spoke about how we live in a word-based creation going back to Genesis, the creative and destructive power of speech, and a large part of the conversation we speak about AI. We speak about the dangers of it, to humans' ability to communicate, and also what to do about that. How are Catholics to properly use artificial intelligence? I really hope that you enjoy the conversation, that it's fruitful, and that it sheds light on how even speech, language, and the spoken word are intrinsically connected to the divine. Thank you. Here we go. Okay, Justin, thank you for being here. I want to give a disclaimer that we've known each other a long time. It feels like a lifetime. How long has it been?
I don't know,
Too
Nick.
long.
I've ruled the day since I met you. It's probably 10 years,
I think it's 10 years.
8 to 10 years.
I think you'll appreciate my first memory of you. I remember we were at a men's retreat, and I I saw there was two gentlemen in a very a properly heated discussion, and one was arguing for Aristotelian thought on metaphysics, and one was Platonic. I don't remember which one you were, but I think I like blacked out from the high intellect that I was experiencing. You were Aristotelian, right?
Well, first of all, the high intellect must have been the other guy. But yeah, I mean, I work with the Platonists, so I need to be very careful saying that I'm an Aristotelian. I love Plato, but in terms of metaphysics and epistemology, ontology, and whatnot, I think Aristotle gives us some really solid ground. Um, but yeah, I a while back I was I mean I have to you have to read Aristotle's Rhetoric, and his Nicomachean Ethics is an incredibly important book. Beyond that, I'm very ignorant. The topics too, where he talks about dialectic, and then of course you pick up on Aristotle, his discussion of form and matter, a lot of his first principles, right? But I wouldn't call myself like an expert in Aristotle.
Hmm. Okay, well, let's get right into that. So, what is rhetoric, and why is it often misunderstood just as manipulation?
Um, Rhetoric. This is going to be simultaneously. Um, uh, well, how can I put this? Rhetoric is the most practical thing you can know. Let's put it that way. So everybody, in a certain regard, is a advertiser for what they study, and going to be promoting their brand or variety or their field or their discipline, what they study. But rhetoric to me is the most practical thing you can study. So Aristotle calls it the faculty of observing, in any given circumstance, the available means of persuasion. So it's a faculty, which means it's a capacity that we have to persuade, to perceive how to persuade people, the best way to persuade people. There are lots of reasons why it's fallen into ill repute, and why people don't like rhetoric and they think it's just manipulation. So it's persuasion. It's something that we do naturally, okay? Even without anybody teaching us. It's something natural to us because we're social creatures. According to Aristotle, We're the zoon politikons. We belong to the polis. But as a consequence of us belonging to a polis, or rather, perhaps as a consequence of language, there is a polis. I speak a language, okay, and it's given to me. I don't make up a language. Nobody makes up their own language. I guess if you're Lewis Carroll, you can do that. And people coin new terms, of course, neologisms, metaphors, and what have you. But in order to do that, in order to not end up in the madhouse, you have to speak the language that everybody else speaks. And we're a political animal, and as per Aristotle, we're the zoon logikon, which has various translations. The logos, which means all sorts of things: word, speech, reason, order in the cosmos, what have you. But it's something natural to us that can be refined by an art, and that's what rhetoric is. It's the art of speaking well. It's the art of writing well. It's the art of persuasion. It's I think it's Richard Weaver who says it's the art of emphasis embodying an order of desire. So it has to do with our desires. The Platonic rhetoric, lots of people confuse Plato as anti-rhetorical. In his Phaedrus, he essentially is talking quite a bit about rhetoric, and he talks a lot about eros in relation to rhetoric, which is comes from our word erotic, but it means desire, right? And it has to do with desire. What do we want people to desire? What do we want our audiences to desire? And so, okay, so it's a faculty, it's an art of emphasis, it's something that we do naturally that can be refined by an art, and it's also, as per Kenneth Burke, the 20th century rhetorician, it's about identification. So I go to a small town in Indiana, or pick your Midwestern farm town, and I'm talking to people, I'm a politician, and I go, I was a farm boy to myself. I say that right before I begin to talk to them. I say, I was a farm boy to myself. And they begin to identify with me. That's what rhetoric is about. It's about identification. Now, it's been given a bad name since time immemorial, okay? So rhetoric is sort of like been a part of the educational apparatus, going all the way back to the ancient world. It comes up to medieval times. The church, if you read book 4 of St. Augustine's De Doctrina Christiani, is going to talk about rhetoric in a Ciceronian vein. And really, for me, well, let's talk about the ancient sort of critique of rhetoric. Oftentimes it's coming through rhetoricians themselves or people who are writing about rhetoric, and it can be abused. Okay, Augustine says essentially, wisdom without eloquence is useless, and eloquence without wisdom is positively dangerous. It's outright dangerous. So you need eloquence and wisdom. Plato says essentially in the Phaedrus, if you can use rhetoric, just be good. Okay, be a good man. All right. And for Quintilian, the Roman, he says basically the ideal is the good man speaking well. The vir bonum dicendi peritus, I believe. But people would abuse it, okay? There are people who were powerful speakers going all the way back to the ancient world. Sophists would teach people how to speak, how to win in court cases. Arguably, what differentiates the sophist from the philosopher is that the sophist takes money, or his end, if you're thinking Aristotelian, his end or his telos is the money. That's why he's teaching what he's teaching. But that's not always the case, because the sophists were playful people. And there are many things that you would find in Plato that are kind of sophistical. Arguing two sides of a given case is something that we get from the sophists. It's called the dissoi logoi. So for every argument, there's an opposite argument. Even there's ironically even an argument that there's an argument to every, or a counter argument to every argument, which is what makes them so playful. But Aristotle says this. He says you can't blame the art for the ends towards which it is put. You can't blame the art for the ends towards which it is put. I got in an argument with a Lyft driver. I don't use Lyft all that often, but I got into an argument with a Lyft driver. He said, rhetoric, isn't that what people do on TV? The politicians are using rhetoric. Isn't that bad? It's an awful thing. And I was trying to walk him through in our 5 to 10 minute drive because I'm not really, all that smart. I think I can convince him that rhetoric is okay, or at least can be used towards good ends. And I was like, you got to read Aristotle's Rhetoric. And he's like, no, I really don't agree. And that's just kind of how it went the whole ride. Why does rhetoric fall into disrepute in what's called modernity? Okay, so from like the post Enlightenment, or from the Enlightenment to the post Enlightenment up into our contemporary moment. And by the way, there's a rediscovery of rhetoric in the 20th century. And also, I mean, there are certain figures, especially in the South, where the rhetorical tradition really doesn't die. Um, it's because of the social sciences or the scientific approach to man, essentially. And quantitative reductionism, which is to say everything can be reduced to numbers. And much of decision making today is rooted in a sort of quantitative reductionism and algorithmic calculus, a cost benefit analysis, where we look at numbers, statistics, etc., and we make decisions based upon that. Rhetoric, trying to persuade somebody by appealing to their heart in addition to their head. Everybody's familiar with ethos, pathos, and logos. But people somehow are like are don't think this is legitimate because we have these sort of Enlightenment ideals of reason alone, whereas rhetoric, I mean, really concerns faith, belief. So if somebody runs in the door and they go and they're looking at me soberly and they go, "There's a fire," okay? I can either choose to believe them or not. I can't see the fire. I just have to take their word for it. So, what is their ethos? Do I know this person to be a vagabond and a heavy drinker and somebody who does illicit drugs? I might not listen to them, right? But if I know them to be an upstanding character, their ethos, they're virtuous. Aristotle says ethos is perhaps the most persuasive thing about us. The fact that we're good people. People want to listen to you. At the end of De Doctrina Christiana, Augustine says, essentially, if you can't master the art of rhetoric, if all this is too hard for you, just live your life so that your whole being becomes an eloquent speech. And that will convince people, right? So, it concerns decision making in contingent and uncertain circumstances. That's where rhetoric really comes into its fullness. And again, as per Aristotle, it looks backward into the past, it concerns the present, and it also concerns the future. It pretty much covers all of our bases. So rhetoric regarding the past is what he calls forensic rhetoric. Of course, that's not the word he's using because he's Greek and whatnot. But this is people, when they were studying law in the ancient world, they didn't like study case law like we do today. They learned how to speak well because that's what prevented your head from getting cut off, was being able to persuade others. So like the practice of law and rhetoric, right from the very beginning, are very intricately related. There's deliberative rhetoric, which concerns the future. What ought we to do? Anytime you say, hey, we should move into this new location, or hey, we ought to invest our money in this or that particular product or service, there's rhetoric, okay? Whenever you're like, I'm going to go to see this movie, there's rhetoric. I'm going to put my kid in this school as opposed to that school, etc. And then there's rhetoric that concerns the present, as per Aristotle, and that's what he calls epideictic rhetoric or ceremonial rhetoric. It's what you find at a funeral oration. The classical example of this is Pericles' funeral oration. A eulogy, of course, and also a wedding. There's wedding toasts and what have you. But you can begin to extend the purview of even epideictic rhetoric beyond that. There's a lot of rhetoric that you find in movies, that you find in advertisements, that you find in television shows. When you're driving down the road, you see a billboard, okay? It's praise or blame rhetoric. That's what epideictic rhetoric is. It's ceremonial, okay? You're pointing out virtues or vices. And essentially that's what you're trying to do when you're trying to identify with your audience, what every brand tries to do or should be doing if they're doing their job. That's a really long answer, Nick. How'd I do?
Well, it shows you clearly know nothing about rhetoric. uh,
Nick?
I it's a thorough answer. It's a good answer, and you did it. I think in the amount of time you were on that lift, it was about the same amount of time. So I think the problem was with the driver, not you. I'm just setting the record straight.
Well, that's the other thing too. I'll just say that about rhetoric. I mean, it's not. This is the whole thing about like science, right? It's an art. Okay, so like their audience has to meet you halfway. There's certain people that aren't open to persuasion. The question is whether or not they have the potential for persuasion, and it's a hopeful art in many regards because what are our alternatives? What are our alternatives to inducing cooperation between people who have different interests. Coercion and manipulation and fear. Speech, of its nature, is fundamentally nonviolent. There are people who are always talking about violence and speech and whatnot, speech as violence. This is scary and really pretty dangerous. In fact, it's when people cease talking that hostilities really begin. When nations begin to cut ties of communication, and when they stop talking, that's when they start fighting with one another. So as long as you're still
Mm.
speaking, there's a hope for peace, even, which sounds idealistic, but it's true.
Is it Joseph Pieper's book, Abuse of Language, Abuse of Power?
It is. I have it on my shelf. I haven't read it in a long time. Please don't quiz me on it.
Well, I certainly, I own it. I haven't read it. So, but there is truth just in the title.
Yeah, that's right. Uh, um, Rhetoric shares with the contemporary critique of power. People like to say, power in itself is evil. This is a Gnostic, sort of contemporary Gnosticism. They go, power is bad. Not necessarily. If you're being harassed by an insurgent group of militant guerrillas, not actual guerrillas, Nick, because you just laughed, okay, with the U and the E.
Despite the current trend going on, if men can defeat gorillas, but we'll put that aside.
I'm happy I don't know what that meme is. Uh, but power is a good thing, okay? Give me the tank. That's great. I'm happy I have it. Same thing with language, right? Or rhetoric, rather. Rhetoric can be very helpful for pacifying an angry mob, for example, which happens to me all the time. Just kidding. You get the point.
Um, okay, so wrapping all that up, again, your extensive knowledge on this. I have to ask though, how did you what inspired you to pursue learning and then going on to teach rhetoric? And I know you got a degree in philosophy of communication. So,
Mhm.
I mean, what brought you to this point?
Um, so I really didn't care about rhetoric at all. Um, for me, it was I was reading a book probably around 2013 to 15, sometime in that time frame, called "Lost in the Cosmos" by a Catholic novelist and philosopher, Walker Percy. And I got my undergraduate degrees in computer science and Spanish, very practical. At least computer science and Spanish, of course, is great. It's very, very helpful depending on the context you're in. Um, and Percy, in the middle of his book, has this thing called, he started talking about semiotics. So I was living in Pittsburgh at the time. I typed in semiotics, and that brought up a faculty member's page at Duquesne University. I ended up contacting the guy. He forwarded my email to somebody else. Went on campus there, and I was so jazzed about semiotics, which is very, very sort of technical, or can be technical. Percy doesn't make it too technical. Investigation into signs and symbols and how they work. And I just said to the guy, "Hey, I want to get my PhD." And he's like, "Well, you got to get your master's first." So I was like, "All right, that's fine. I'll do that." And the program was rhetoric and philosophy of communication. And I had no idea at the time, but these people were incredibly intelligent and smart. And rhetoric was a sort of surprise find along the way. I was really more interested in signs and symbols because Percy set me on that road.
Okay, you do teach at Ave Maria University,
Hmm.
and in knowing you, I know you. I don't want to inflate your ego here, but you are one of the best practicing Catholics I think I know across the
Hmm.
board. So could you share a bit about your journey in the faith as well, on the other side of your education and your faith? How did you get to where you're at now?
Uh, well, first of all, I'm very humbled by that. I don't know. I don't necessarily think that's the case. That's kind of how I feel about my wife. Um, and yeah, I just feel like I have a long way to go. I just started doing the little office of the Blessed Virgin Mary to try and pray more. Because of course there's so many different things you could try. But yeah, I mean, I converted to Catholicism in 2014. Um, and it was in the Pittsburgh diocese. The oratorians there were great. And yeah, I tried all. I mean, I was raised nominally a Lutheran. My parents would take us to church. Um, baptized into the Lutheran church there. But then when I got into high school and college, I kind of went off the rails there and started looking into things like Buddhism and Eastern religions, which people always laugh at, trying to imagine me as a Buddhist. It wasn't like a real Buddhist type thing, like putting on my orange robe and shaving my head and whatnot, sitting there in the lotus position. It was more like this sort of cultural Buddhism of the 60s. There's Jack Kerouac and the Allen Ginsberg types. And the first book on philosophy I actually ever read was after I had my wisdom teeth out. I probably never told you this story. Just imagine me with my mouth filled with gauze and sitting in my one parents' room where they had the piano, first floor of their house, in a rocking chair, with my teeth filled with gauze. And I was Robert Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Somebody gave me this book. And yeah, he just started doing philosophy. I was like, this is really strange, but also kind of literature. It was like a philosophy literature type combination. And that really kind of piqued my interest in philosophy.
So in losing your wisdom teeth, you began to find real
Look, man,
wisdom.
wisdom is all about irony. This is the essence of the sort of Socratic know thyself. Socrates wandering around going, I don't know, I'm an idiot, and making people look like idiots as he himself was claiming to be an idiot. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Sure. Yeah. Now, I'm going to refer to my notes for this one. I do want to dive into the intersection of faith and language,
Mm-hmm.
because I think, at the heart of communication, the heart of rhetoric is language. But first, just one more thing about you personally. How does your faith that you now have, how does that enhance your ability to both understand and teach rhetoric and communication?
Well, it has to be the beginning and the end. Where you start your inquiry and where you end. Sets the guidelines or the boundaries from which you can run and run pretty free. When I was converting Catholicism, I read Chesterton, and I was really inspired by how hilarious and intelligent he was. And for me, you know, the life of the mind, trying to be a scholar, trying to write, trying to read, you really have to have a certain humility, which I don't necessarily claim to have. But you have to begin your inquiries with humility and try and end with humility. And eventually you have to reach a point where you say, I don't know. And I think the faith helps you get there. The faith helps preserve mystery. And at root, language is very mysterious. It's a very, very mysterious thing, to the point where if you don't have the faith and you're a postmodernist, you start talking about language with a capital L, which is their word for God, wherein the language speaks the subject. I think it may have been Michel Foucault, who said this. Some postmodernists said this, but essentially, language itself becomes animated in a way. Language is not just a tool. We could talk more about that at a certain point in time if you want. And the postmodernists actually are helpful in a certain regard in calling that out, a sort of instrumental view of language. But without the faith, if you begin to look into the mysteries of language and the extraordinary power of language to shape consciousness, perception, social groups, it's everywhere, written and spoken. It can become a god. Anything that you're studying can really become a god, because in a way you have to serve. Well, you have to follow the conversation. I had a professor who used to say you have to follow the dialectic. When you're in class, students are asking questions, you follow the dialectic. You see where the conversation is going. And it's the same way in inquiry. You just got to make sure you don't follow the dialectic off the edge of a cliff.
This is interesting you say this. I think that their perversion of language as a god
Mm-hmm.
is it's a bit like the Black Mass, showing the reality of the true Mass.
Mm-hmm.
The Black Mass of Satanists is what I'm referring to. Because I wanted to read some some biblical quotes here.
Okay.
So first with Genesis. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. So right very beginning of the biblical narrative, we have God speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, each stage of creation is spoken into existence.
Mm-hmm.
And then moving on to John, when he says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God."
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you make of God in proper terms being equated or identified as the Word? What is the Word? And maybe why is that different from the language that the modern culture uses as their God?
Yeah. So let me preface this statement with the fact that I am not a theologian. I have a tremendous amount of respect for theologians because the nuances are pretty important. Um, so again, I work for a Catholic university, doing the best I can. So take what I say here with a grain of salt. But okay, so fiat lux, let there be. There's so much you could say about this, but words, God's word in particular creates. So the word with a capital W creates. So you find new life in Christ. You're regenerated. You're remade. You're transformed in the being, in the person, in the word that is Christ. Words in human terms also create, though. They don't just represent the world around us. This is the instrumentalist view of language that would just say language is a tool. We use it to represent things. And the most basic example is, I'm going to do my best Donald Trump. You're fired, okay? What have you just done? You've just created a new world for this person, okay? And for the organization. If you're getting married, okay, and you're pledging your troth to the other, all right, you're saying these words, I do, I do, I do. You're saying, make it so, let it be, and it creates a new reality. So, and you can go through each of the sacraments. I mean, if you don't pronounce the words correctly at baptism, the person isn't baptized.
Right.
Words are really important. In the beginning was the Word. The word in Latin, in the Vulgate, if I'm not mistaken, is verbum. It's not noun, but verb. So the word is a doing. It's a happening. It's something that happens. And the person to read on this, if you want to read more, is Walter Ong. Father Ong was a Jesuit priest, talks quite a bit about the word in a theological context relative to its function as a medium. Words are media. And media are things that we take for granted. We don't realize them until we make a special effort to pay attention to them, or until they break. Until they break. So the other thing that shares this characteristic, or these characteristics, are environments. We don't pay attention to the environment unless we make a special act of attention to pay attention to it, or it breaks. And the example would be air. So air, if I start smelling smoke or like burning plastic or a burning tire, I can tell something's going on. It's happening. Something's happening. Okay? Or if I hear somebody down the street yelling something, I don't know what they're saying, but I know they're saying something and something is happening. So words are in us, but in a very real and weird way, we're in the sea of language, of words. Behind me is a bookshelf filled with words. The words I'm speaking are in the air, right? It's an environment that we're in. And so this is all at the human level. When we talk about putting on the new man, this is St. Paul, right? Put on the new man. I have a good Protestant friend who told me one time, he's like, dude, you got to put on the new man. I was getting mad. It was something, it's like, didn't get my order right or something like this. You got to put on the new man, right? In other words, you gotta put on the right environment. You gotta put on the right words. When people convert, what do? Well, if you're like me, you begin talking differently. You might stop cursing. You might stop using obscenities. You're going to start learning new words, and with new words, you're going to start learning new things because they are media. They mediate knowledge. They mediate an understanding or an awareness of the world around us. When people begin to lose their faith, one of the signs that something is wrong is the way they speak. And Christ himself says this. He says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. Which is to say, our words are a reflection of our innermost identity as persons. How do you get inside somebody's head? How do you know what a person's thinking? You ask them questions, and then you look at their face on an MRI or whatever, scanner, magnetic resonance imaging. You're seeing what's going on. You're like, oh, the prefrontal cortex, they must be scared about that thing I asked them. Or you just ask them a question. Because an utterance is an outerance. It's where the inner becomes outer. And it's an embodied, corporeal, incarnate thing that we do when we speak. What do you think about all this, Nick?
Well, I think that I asked I knew the exorcist within a certain diocese, and I was asking him, because there's a lot of, truths and non-truths that go around about the demonic, and, can they read our thoughts? The understanding is no, they don't read our thoughts. They cannot. They can study us, like kind of you just said. They can study our facial features. Are we anxious? Are we sweating? They're master tacticians, but they can't know for sure what is within us unless we speak it. And I think about that all the time. I think, especially when anger is brewing within me or something like that, that they can't know unless I speak it. And so it's best not to speak without thinking first. Be sure what I'm saying that I'm okay with all all forms of the spiritual being aware of. Um and I that quote will wrap around to it from Christ, because I want to touch on that more in a little bit. And now again, understanding, acknowledging you're not a theologian proper, and so this, your answer is not taken with that weight. But
Mm-hmm.
what is your understanding? This is something I think a lot of people probably get confused by, is Christ is the Logos, God is the Word, the Bible is the Word of God. Which is which? What's what?
Mm-hmm.
Is the Bible God?
Well, something that's helpful and something that I think we were kind of talking about the other day, and I won't go into that, but we were talking about analogy, and I think analogy here is what matters. Um, Analogy helps us to understand how the same word can relate to different things. Analogy always concerns the relationship between sameness and difference, sameness in difference or difference in sameness, and it always concerns relationships. So when we're talking about our words, there's an analogical relationship between our word and God's word, but they're not the same thing per se. You could use it. You can talk about knowledge in this manner too. Okay, so here's an analogy for you. Knowledge is to the angels as knowledge is to man. But just to say that our knowledge that we have is proportionate to our being, to who we are, and angelic knowledge is proportionate or relative to what angels are in their essence. So when we're talking about, the Bible as God's word, it is God's word. But it's obviously, not animated like a person in the same exact way that I'm talking to you right now. But it also kind of is, because it's this word coming through the book.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so when we're talking about God's word. The Bible is God's word. It's His inspired word. It is Him speaking to us. Okay, but in a way, it's at least we're talking about the materiality of the Bible. What is the relationship between the materiality of the written word? I have your name written on this paper here. It says Nick. Is that you? Oh, I got it written Nick.
So is it the essence? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, I don't know if I would. Well, yes and no. I'm trying to draw attention to the analogy here because I'm talking to Nick and Nick can talk back. But like Nick is also on my paper and it's referring to Nick and not like a copy of Nick, but Nick, the essence of Nick, Nick and his being Nick, right? So there's an analogy here. This is a really sticky wicket in terms of like we were walking down a path and then we're walking down analogy. We can keep going down that road. I need to take out my intellectual machete and hopefully I don't cut myself.
Well, we can keep going with. I want to keep exploring the biblical narrative, going back. I think maybe in a sense going back to the first word uttered to the present. So, I have another. This is from John Lennox, who I've been listening to a lot of lately. He's also explored this kind of in defense of Christianity and how it is more than philosophy. And when he looked at, Christ, God's utterance, even "Let there be light," um, and John's quote as well. The word already was. The world came to be. Humans came to be. Everything came from the word. So this is a word-based creation that we're in. And he was breaking down some of the actual ways that statement is true. He's a mathematician, so he was saying that most anything in life is mathematically describable. At least many things are. And then within biology, information bearing macromolecule DNA, there's a language within it. God even had Adam name the animals. So he was giving some evidence that both physics and biology are word-based, and evidence that everything flows from the word capital W. Now focusing on humans, how is the ability to communicate, flowing from him, humans being made word-based creations, how is our ability to communicate not only tied to our human nature, but is it also proof that of us being made in the image and likeness of God?
The short answer is yes. Can I leave it there?
Okay.
No. So I just need to lay a little bit of, clear out a little bit of a forest so we can build a fire, intellectually speaking, okay? Communication, and by the way, let me ask this before I do that, before I clear the forest and build the fire. I got the machete, right? Is this from his book on AI, John Lennox's book on AI, by chance?
He might talk about it in there. These are just interviews I've been listening to.
Okay, interviews, okay. And this is the Protestant theologian?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, language, well, communication, let's say. This is like one-on-one stuff when I'm talking to students. What is language and what is communication? Can we say that they're the same thing? And what is a medium? It's very helpful to define these things first. Okay? And you can use metaphors, of course, to do all this, but let's just be straightforward. Is communication the transmission of information? this is how people typically think of communication. Very popular in the 20th century in particular. You have what's called the Shannon-Weaver model, where you have a sender and a receiver, and the sender sends a message down a pipe or a wire, right? This is the channel, and that message is traveling, and it might be hitting noise, all right, which is preventing you from hearing what I'm saying. Then it gets to the receiver, and the receiver sends feedback, and then it happens again. Okay. Is this a valid model for what communication is? Yes, it is, but it's also reductive. And all models are reductive in some way or another. But this model, first of all, I think Claude Shannon was very well known for his work in information theory. There are certain biases or certain things that this model obscures for us. It's one directional. So you send the message, it gets there, so on and so forth. This is not really how we communicate when we're engaging in dialogue, because I'm watching your face, whether you're grimacing, or whether you're wincing, whether you're beginning to retch. I can tell how you're reacting as I'm talking, and I'm adapting my message to you in real time, simultaneously. There's a synchronicity at play. Communication is more than just the transmission of information. This is where I get kind of leery about, and you could talk about animals communicating, which is fascinating when you're talking about like pheromones. Snakes have pits on their faces where they can detect heat. Okay, it's crazy to me. And bees, the way that they do their little wiggly dance, like, and dolphins and whatnot, the way that they communicate. That's still communication. That's a valid use of the term. But if we are to sync up the study of communication to the humanistic art of rhetoric, okay, to philosophy proper, and to theology, we have to transcend the information model. We have to transcend the Shannon-Weaver model. It's imperative. The Catholic intellectual Marshall McLuhan, one of my heroes, his son, Eric McLuhan, I believe he studied at the University of Dallas, wrote a short article called A Catholic Theory of Communication. I think that's the name of it. And in that, he basically says, look, there's the Shannon-Weaver, that's fine, but there's the transformation model of communication. You have the information transmission model, and then you have the transformation model. And that's where he wants to go with the Catholic theory of communication, which is to say, when we communicate with others, we are transformed. The goal of rhetoric is to change the audience. And this is disturbing to some people. Like, no, you shouldn't change people's minds. You shouldn't want to change people's opinions or attitudes or beliefs. You shouldn't want to change people. That's not how God thinks. In fact, Eric McLuhan, same guy, goes so far as to suggest, and you could say this is a metaphor. Metaphors are instructive. Or I don't know if you would consider it non-metaphorical. Let's just say it's a metaphor for right now for a thought experiment. God himself is a rhetor, and he speaks his word, and his word is perfectly adapted to the human race, and his word is his son. And the question is whether or not you identify with the rhetor. So God himself, St. Irenaeus says this, I think in Against the Heresies. He says, God does not use force. Okay? He doesn't use force. He uses persuasion. And if you actually look, the Greek word for assent, basically, and I think Aristotle's Rhetoric, is pistis, which is to say fides, which is to say faith. It's the end or the purpose of rhetoric is to engender faith, to sway, to move another. So, I can't even remember what your question was. I just went down a gigantic rabbit hole, and I haven't even defined language and medium. I can do that if you want,
Yeah.
or we can go, yeah. Okay, so
No, go for it.
so language is the means by which we facilitate communication. It's a medium. A medium is that which stands between me and you. Okay, that which is between you and I, or you and me, as we communicate. And in the Shannon-Weaver model, language is the channel, okay, that we send the message over. Or I mean, you could think of the air or the wire as the channel or whatnot. But the medium and the Shannon-Weaver model, the information transmission model of communication, is always neutral. It's always neutral, okay? Information, people talk about it. You just get enough information, okay, and you'll have the facts, just the facts, ma'am. And then you got everything you need, and you can arrive at the truth and knowledge. But that is not how it works. Because the medium is never neutral. The language is never neutral. It's loaded. It has a particular valence and charge to it. Some are positively charged words, some are negatively charged words. If we begin to move in a direction of physics and chemistry relative to language, if I call that over there, that a fetus, it embodies a particular attitude or orientation, an ethical orientation towards that. But if I call that a person, okay, it's a different attitude, a different orientation, a different motivational set of, it's a different set of motivations that I have
Mm-hmm.
towards that thing or person, whatever it may be, or whoever it may be, right? To call it an it as opposed to a thou. This is Martin
Mm-hmm.
Buber, the Jewish philosopher's whole thing. If I say it, right? That in a sense dehumanizes it. The word I use for it reflects something about it. So language is never neutral. We can't talk about media as neutral. And the fallacy today is that if we just get enough information, we'll be able to make the correct decisions. The problem is there's too much information. And so we're using algorithms to sort and AI to sort. But you know what else sorts? Rhetoric. Other persons sort. Okay? So I totally lost what your original question was, and for that I apologize. But I'm willing to answer it. I said we were clearing a forest, okay? So that's just me hacking around with the machete. Oh, all right. Hopefully I didn't cut you or anything.
No, I'm bleeding out. But yeah, well, I was just saying, is it also evidence that we are, I mean, you touched on it with animals, that they can communicate, but they can't speak.
Mhm,
So does being able to use language, is that evidence that we are made in the image and likeness of God? Because
mhm,
um, the secular world loves to think that animals and humans are the
mhm,
same value. That is, that we are animals.
mhm,
We are very clearly, and maybe you can touch on too, monkeys or gorillas can use sign language, but they can't speak.
mhm,
So, um, I've also heard you, this is kind of only tangentially related, but I've also heard you talk about when children are learning to speak and how it's kind of babble until it catches fire and then
mhm,
they just talk. So,
mhm.
um, let's hone in on that, in what are your thoughts on all that?
So, well, there's all sorts of interesting things, places we can go with this. At bottom, okay, if somebody were to tell me humans and dolphins are no different, um, dolphins are nowhere near as perverse as human beings. Okay, and it's not simply that we bless with the tongue, but we also lie and cheat and steal and like, hey, we should start a war as we're communicating with one another. Um, so we're relatively perverse. And if you read what is it, the book of James, he talks about the tongue as a restless fire. Great book to meditate on the importance of speaking well. Um, I don't know if I would call our use of language and our capacity to communicate a proof, although proof maybe is the correct term. I would go to sign. It's a symptom. It's a sign, okay, that we are communal creatures. We're made for community, and the Trinity is a community of persons. So we have built within us the capacity to speak. Now, I think it's Suzanne Langer who says that among creatures, we're the only ones who babble. So when you're watching a child begin to speak, they begin to just start imitating your face because um, speaking is all about imitation. It's about imitating the tones. When you begin to write, you're imitating the shapes. It's all about imitation. Aristotle says in his Poetics, he's talking about like drama, and he's saying imitation is a form of learning. In the ancient rhetorical scheme, it was, how did you learn something? Theory and practice, which everybody knows, but imitation is a way of learning, right? It's a way of learning how to do something. And like when you're teaching a kid to speak, they're imitating you. You're not teaching them the rules of grammar at first. You're teaching them how to speak. Grammar, by the way, the rules of grammar, that's all literate. Gramma from the word letter in Greek. But there's an order to language, okay? And there's an order to the cosmos. And there is an analogy between human speech and animal speech, which in itself, like we're made in the image and likeness of God, but animals too are signs of God in an extraordinary way. So are you familiar with what the state bird of Florida is? Don't look it up.
No, no, I'm not.
Okay, so I'm total amateur botanist right now, naturalist. I'm in this naturalist phase. Whenever I go through phases, my wife, bless her soul. But it's the I think it's the mockingbird, the northern mockingbird, maybe North American,
I
northern.
almost hit one with my car the other day. Go on.
Thank you for sharing. The mockingbird, okay, the Latin in the binomial nomenclature is the mimus polyglottus. The mimus polyglottus. Yeah, why are we talking about mimus polyglottus? Well, the mockingbird imitates the sounds of other creatures and or things. Like, I don't know enough about mockingbirds to know whether or not they mimic the sound of a car horn, but it would not surprise me because this is what parrots do. But do they know what they're saying? Do they know? And what does it mean to know what you're saying? The anecdote that Walker Percy uses over and over again is Helen Keller learning to speak. And she's sitting out by the water pump, and there's water pumping over one hand, and her teacher, Ann Sullivan, is spelling out W-A-T-E-R in the other. Okay? Now, there, of course, this is not the spoken word, but the written word, but there are analogies. And she realizes, after she does it enough, that this thing over here, this spelling, is this thing over here, the flowing water. It's not a copy, okay? It is. That's what it is. And when you have a kid, you know that once you give them the name of something, they want to know what this thing is, and what is it, and what is it, what is it, what is it. They want to know what things are, because it's through the name that we come to know the thing. We don't know just names. This is the fallacy of nominalism or nameism, which is to say we just know the name. There are no essences to things. We don't just know the name. We know the thing through the name, and the name is a necessary component to our knowing that thing. Okay? The thing really has to exist, but we know the world around us through words, through language, okay? And ultimately through the other, because we get language from the other. It's the father or the mother that goes, that's what that is. That is a mockingbird that brings the child into a world of meaning, okay? It's a different orientation than simply being a baby, screaming and crying, although babies are defined by their inability to speak, right? It's infant is from infans, which means literally without speech. So it's through the other and through a community that a child is brought up into a language, and through language knows the world and their place within it. Knows the world and their place within it. And if their language deteriorates, they don't know their place in the world. This is a problem. This is why Walker Percy wrote fiction. This is why poets poeticize. To refresh perception, to charge the world with meaning. So the word is a special blessing. It is an extraordinary gift that unites self and other. And it's through the word that we come to know the other and come to know ourselves. It's impossible without it.
So in that vein, with your ending there, I want to go back to the quote from our Lord when he says, "Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." Um, okay, so how can we strive to speak well?
Um, well, this is a common question. What do we mean by well?
I mean, a well with water in it.
um, the right speech is always dependent upon the context. Always. So you can never really say a priori, once and for all, this is what you should say. And this is what makes the living word, the embodied word, the dialogue, human communication so extraordinary and surprising. It's why people have conversations, is because, well, among other things, they also need to be like, hey, can we eat that berry? Is because we don't know what's coming next. And so, what was your original question? I forgot your question.
Well, how can we speak well?
How can we speak well? The best way to speak well is to know your audience. And to observe decorum and to be prudent. So let's go through those three. To know your audience, to be prudent, and to observe decorum. And actually, let me write that down. The audience, the decorum, and what was the last one, Nick? Help me. Be prudent. Okay.
Yes, prudence. That's right. Yes.
This is not a master class in how to communicate well. One of the ironies, let me point this out. What my patron saint, by the way, is Saint Philip Neri. And in part it was the humor. Humor has always been a major, in storytelling with my father, a major part of my life. And when I learned that Saint Philip Neri would shave half of his beard and go out in public, later I learned that he would make the seminarian who was gifted at speaking give the same sermon over and over again. I'm like, this is my man. Because humor is so incredibly important. And what's so humorous about people when they go on to their advanced studies is typically they have some sort of deficiency in the area they're studying that's major. Like people who study communication have not a single idea of how to communicate, which I'm demonstrating because I can't even remember the three things that I wanted to tell you about how to communicate well.
I think you have so many things you want to communicate.
I do.
That's why. It's actually the opposite.
Well, you have to make a decision ultimately, right? Every time you make a decision, you make a choice, and every choice is ethical. The way that you speak is always a reflection of who you are. Okay, so now that we've meta-communicated, we've communicated about how we communicate, which is also a very effective way to communicate if you are in a relationship and the relationship is problematic. Almost always, or almost certainly, there's a problem with how you're talking to one another or not talking to one another, or how you're listening or how you're not listening. And oftentimes what you have to do with the other is draw attention to the patterns of communication, which can be problematic. And if you can't meta-communicate, that's when you get real serious issues in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Know your audience. Human beings are fallible creatures. Aristotle's Rhetoric is always about your audience. The whole discussion of pathos, people are like, oh, it's emotion. Ethos, pathos, logos, just emotion. You can use emotion. It's really about preparing fertile ground for your ideas in the audience's mind. Angry people can't listen. You're going to have a conversation with somebody that's angry? No. You know this if you have children. You're going to have a reasonable conversation with an angry kid? Give them a sucker and then have that conversation. It's a different conversation. Okay, you have to know the audience. You also don't want to, when you're talking to an audience, you don't want to talk down to them. You don't want to explain to them things that they already know. Bore them out of their mind. You have to know your audience. You have to try and seek identification with your audience. I've thought, people teach public speaking at university. They just need to change that class to the audience. People think of public speaking as a technique, in particular, it's style and delivery and maybe a little bit of memory. But really, you have to understand the audience if you're to be a good speaker. Decorum. Nick, is it appropriate to wear a clown suit to a funeral?
I learned the hard way, no.
Typically, no, unless it's a clown. Or unless you want to insult the dead. Okay?
Yeah.
So what you
Yeah.
communicate by your dress, it's what is appropriate. Decorum or appropriateness is always relative or contingent to the circumstance. And that's your dress, your nonverbals, the words that you're using. You do not talk the same way to different people. You don't
You see
talk
my
the same
nonver
way to your
I'm
boss or
doing
supervisor.
nonverbals right now for anybody who can't see me.
Okay. Anyway, before I was so rudely interrupted, being rude, by the way, is a violation of decorum. Decorum, I mean, when people say hi to you, I mean, this is decorum in a certain regard. It's also what's called phatic communication. It's a way of kind of like just touching another at a distance and being like, I acknowledge your presence. It would be awkward to make eye contact with somebody for like 3 or 4 seconds and not say a single word. It is communicating something. The nonverbals are decorum. I mean, you could do a whole class. You could write a whole series of books on the subject. Isocrates, the ancient rhetorician, talks a lot about decorum. Tu prepon is the word he's using, appropriateness. But if you want to be a good communicator, you have to think in terms of decorum. What is appropriate? You have to know your audience. What is appropriate for my particular audience? And finally, and perhaps it should be first, is be prudent. Which is to say, be virtuous. Prudence always concerns practical decision-making in particular contingent circumstances that could always be otherwise. Okay? You have to know how to act differently in different circumstances. This is why in Aristotle, in his Nicomachean Ethics, it's like, are you or are you not supposed to get out of your foxhole after you wait 20 seconds and da-da-da, and you have this big algorithmic calculus of when you're supposed to get out of your foxhole. It's like, you can't calculate that in advance. So what does Aristotle do? He's like, it's kind of like a spectrum. Okay, there's this thing, there's a vice on one end, and it's called cowardice. Everybody knows cowardice. But on the other side, there's brashness, being brash or overly confident. You're going to hurt yourself and maybe other people you're fighting with. So you need to aim for the mean. And what is it that helps you discern that mean? It's prudence. Itself is a virtue to be able to know and to decide, even when you can't say in advance how you're supposed to act precisely with some sort of precision. And it's the same thing with speech. You don't always know exactly what you want to say, but it helps to prepare. It helps to have in mind what you want to say. You want to exercise tact and discretion. You want to be a good listener. And you want to observe silence every now and then, if not more often than not. St. Arsenius the Great said, I've oftentimes regretted the things I've said, and I've never regretted my silence. If you end up working at an institution, almost certainly you're going to want to write the email. You get an email, you're going to want to write the email because you're angry and you're upset. You need to wait and you need to calm down, all right? Or the text message, whatever it may be. And you need to be patient. You got to have a little bit of humility. You have to be prudent, okay? Tact, the idea of tact, I love tact as a communicative virtue because it presupposes a touch and like tactile, right? So like people have a certain kind of soft touch in human relationships and in interpersonal relationships and in communication. And they know when it's the opportune moment to speak or to not speak. That is intricately connected with wisdom, okay? This is why the ideal was not just wisdom, but eloquence and wisdom. To be able to speak well and to be well, to be good. Imagine the good that you can do if you would only begin speaking well. What do we mean by well? It's not just I get what I want, but I'm virtuous. It's the difference between excellence and effectiveness. I think Alistair McIntyre, I think, makes this distinction. Excellent speech is virtuous speech, which is to say, it might not always be effective. The end might not always turn out, but you still said what you needed to say. Okay, you didn't lie when it would have been absolutely so much better for you and your family if you did lie. Christ's speech himself, brought before Pilate, brought before the Sanhedrin, brought before the trial. Okay, this is our image that we're supposed to imitate. This is the speech that we're supposed to imitate, right? So, audience, decorum, and prudence. And I remembered it because I wrote it down.
And speaking well can, Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot too. The spoken word brings order out of chaos. And so when we do tell the truth, like if you lie verbally, it can destroy, but even just speaking the truth all the time brings good order. And so there is a incredibly tangible reality that follows the words that we do speak. And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, telling the truth, okay? Now, I'm an advocate for the truth. I am a realist. I have a thing of words carved into wood on my wall over here. It says, truth depends not on our knowledge, but on the existence of things. St. Thomas Aquinas. This is from his commentary on Augustine's, on the teacher. Now, somebody comes to you and they have egg on their face, okay? Is it uncomfortable to tell them that they have egg on their face or a giant piece of food in their teeth? To tell them the truth, as it were, just blurt out in conversation the truth.
Mm-hmm.
You need to wait for the opportune moment to tell them the truth. It's the same thing in evangelization. It's the same thing if you're courting. It's the same thing in difficult circumstances where you have to deliver bad news. The truth is paramount, but timing matters. You have to, and this is, you think about it scripturally, God chooses the opportune moment to speak. This is an insight from Father Ong. He chooses to send his word at a very particular moment in time. Okay? Right at this intersection of Hebraic culture, Greco-Roman culture, okay? And right at the intersection or the juncture between oral cultures, where the spoken word predominates, and literate cultures, where the written word predominates, such that the germs of his word, the seeds of his word, could spread as far as possible.
Wow.
So you have
Never
to
heard
speak at the opportune moment. And that's called, the Greek term for that is kairos. It's a rhetorical term.
So I want to go back to what you said about being an organization and being frustrated and how you communicate, because I know someone who was received an email that frustrated them in their company, and they were typing out a frustrated response, and someone said to them as a joke, "Hey, you should run that through chat GPT, make sure that have it soften your tone for you." And he said, "Oh, I already did that. I already ran the I already ran what I was gonna say through, and I had it make me sound more kind." And I was like, "Oh man, we're already at that place where we are relying on the almighty AI to make us sound more human." So naturally, everything that's been said, we now need to turn to AI, and it's in the war it's raging on human communication. Um, and I've obviously, in knowing you, I've heard you speak about this, but how is in your view, the current explosive growth of artificial intelligence destroying humans' abilities to communicate?
So great question, Nick. I'm surprised it took us this whole time to get to the AI question. I was been looking forward to this. I need to grab
This is
something.
the crescendo. Yeah, this is the crescendo.
This is the crescendo. Yeah. All right, here we go. Well, I need to show you something that relates to this. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, so I had a student give me this mug of which just the other day was dropped off, and I love it. Now I don't know if you can see this. It says "Dare to keep kids off," and drugs is scratched out, and it says AI. Now the back part is my favorite part. It says "Don't skip intellectual leg day." Don't skip intellectual leg day. Now I'm going to explain this metaphor. Okay. We're always grasping for metaphors when it comes to new technological advances, especially relative to communication. And people are like, it's just like a calculator. It's just like a calculator. Just use it like a tool. It's neutral. Okay, we already know that media are not neutral. Okay. The appropriate metaphor is, or at least one appropriate metaphor, is going to the gym. And when you go to the gym, you could bring somebody with you to lift your weights for you. But that would defeat the purpose of going to the gym. It would be a catastrophic waste of your time. Okay? You go to the gym to get strong. You can lift several hundred pounds with a forklift, no problem. But when you go to the gym, the point is for you to become strong, for you to change, for you to be transformed. Education is all about being transformed by those you encounter and by learning a new vocabulary. And by learning that new vocabulary, gaining a new perception of the world, a new understanding of it. Now, how does this relate to your question about AI and having somebody rewrite their email for them, okay? I knew you were going to go here when you started telling the anecdote because I have heard this more than once from different people. I think in different parts of the country, people are doing this. We already know that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. We already know in the epistle of James that to bridle the tongue, trying to wrestle the tongue down, douse the fire that's raging in our mouths, is a battle. Okay? Book of Job. All of life is a battle, a warfare. To speak, to not to speak well. When you begin to displace your communication, especially interpersonally, to a machine, you begin to have it lift the weight for you. Okay? In terms of communication. But what we really need to be concerned about is virtue. The word virtue from vir, which means man, but it also means strength. The whole point of learning how to be virtuous, first of all, virtue comes from virtuous deeds, and speech is a deed. And what happens when you have a machine do that deed for you? You begin to lose the capacity, or you don't gain the capacity to speak well, which is to say excellently, virtuously. You lose that capacity. It's a struggle to find the right words, both when you're writing an email and when you're lifting a weight. It's a struggle to find the right words when you're speaking to a group of people and when you're lifting a weight. But you come out of that struggle other than you were. So when we remove that struggle, we're losing something about our habits, or we're not gaining a habit that we otherwise might gain that goes beyond that sort of context of emails. All of this, by the way, totally neglects or doesn't consider where these messages go, which contain all sorts of sensitive information, which is problematic. But there's a relationship here that I want to really underscore for people. People can say, yes, AI is going to make us worse communicators. Maybe. In some regards, maybe it'll make us better communicators. Depends on what we mean by better, okay? Again, think about communication as more than just the transmission of information. It's about being transformed and transforming others. So what really is at stake here is not necessarily, it's going to take over these communicative tasks. It's going to, in certain circumstances, remove obstacles that I need in order to become virtuous. People need to reflect on that. There's some sort of genius to the struggle It's like somebody asked me the other day, it's like, I forget what their question was. Like, how do we make education more enjoyable? Because Aristotle says that learning is pleasurable, something like this. And it's true. I mean, the way that Aristotle talks about the intellectual life and the pleasures that follow from knowing. There's something pleasurable about knowing something. Like when I eat food, I get hungry, and I eat and I'm satiated. And if I keep eating, it turns into pain. Okay. Now, when I'm learning something and I'm really into it, I can keep going. Okay. I might become fatigued. My eyes might get, tired or whatnot. But like, the mind is in a real way kind of like an infinite container. Okay, you can just keep learning things and get deeper and deeper, right? And then we die before we read all the books that we want to read. Um, but I told this person, it was like, it's not necessarily that we need to be comfortable when we're learning something, because sometimes learning is very irritating. Right now I'm reading Cormac McCarthy's Border trilogy, essentially at the recommendation of a student. It's great. Okay. Written in 1992. It was about two guys who go from Texas into Mexico, set in 1949. My dude, I don't know if it's the publisher or Cormac McCarthy, no quotation marks, okay? And he doesn't separate his independent clauses with commas. All that's for your eyeball, okay? And I'm like, who's talking? There's lines of dialogue. It's
Wow.
irritating, okay? I'm irritated, Cormac. But it's also an awesome book. It's a really awesome book thus far, okay? Take that with a grain of salt. I haven't finished it. About 100 pages in. The first chapter is 96 pages, 97
Whoa.
pages. But the point being is learning is irritating. And you know what else is irritating? Lifting weights,
Mm,
going to the gym,
mm,
running. It's that irritating bit that if we're not careful, we're gonna lose something. Okay, we're gonna be like the people in Wall-E. Uh, but at the intellectual level.
mm. I often, so I can recall in the last 2 years from when there was, just in the workplace, there was no AI. I mean, you knew of it, but no one really utilized it. Two, after that first year, it was like, we're using chat a lot to help us with prompts and to help refine our grammar and, yeah, um, maybe even to bounce ideas off of. And then it's the second year, then now where are we at? It's voice replication, voice creation. I can feed a certain, I mean, there's just like a million AI programs and you know, the temptation to say we have a problem, what AI program can solve it for us now? So if I, you can feed it someone's voice, and there's a certain program that can replicate their voice. You can do like this is a side note, but I thought it was funny. Um, you can feed it like just 30 seconds or 10 minutes, and they say the 10-minute clip of someone's voice will provide accurate recreation. I didn't have time, and I fed it 30 seconds, and it kept making the voice British. It was not a British person. Those are the kinks. But the thing is, there was also the kink of the famous AI video created of Will Smith eating pasta, and it was like nightmare fuel. And even with Google VO3 that came out recently, uh, it looks almost like real people. And we're swiftly moving out of the golden era, what I call, of AI use, which is where it was as close to a calculator as you could get. It had some as neutral, they weren't neutral, but it was as neutral as it could be utility.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little bit like, I think, if you had someone come into the weight room with you and they're helping pick up weights and swap out weights. And what's the benefit of that? Or maybe the net positive is I can lift more weights quicker when I'm not having to go swap them out and reposition the bar. And
Lazy
um,
bum. Go on.
well, if you're going to have a utility with an AI assistant in the weight room, I think that's the extent that you would want it. And it does serve the twin gods of productivity and efficiency, fair, but it's not doing the real work for you. We've moved out of that, I think, I think we are literally right now, and it might even be within the next few months at how fast it moves, moving into this place of it's doing the work for us and it's thinking for us. And even in the work I do, which is creative work, having to, I am tempted to, because I'm not, in knowing myself and a plethora of personality, quizzes and tests and everything. But something I've learned about myself is invention is not where I is not doesn't come the easiest for me in the creative process. And so there's been times where I've bounced ideas off of AI, and just to get the ball rolling, if I didn't have somebody there with me, um, the temptation for that to become, give me an idea, like, you, not I'm bouncing an idea off you, and you give me the idea. What could I do here? Is what you sort of spoke to. Is I Not everybody is. I don't know if you can learn creativity, but you can learn how to maximize your creativity. So I'm not doing that when I'm asking AI to do creative tasks for me, for sure, amongst other things. And so it's a serious threat. But I think the next question then is for you. Okay, um, how are Catholics to properly utilize AI, um, in the workplace and in life, kind of across the board? What kind of relationship should we have with it?
Okay, so for me, the most important thing is that people are able to ask the right questions and to question. Okay, so like technology giveth and technology taketh away. This is a good maxim to just come to embody. Technology giveth and technology taketh away. I'm going to go use an example. Email. Okay, people will say email is a tool. Email makes things more efficient, helps us to become more productive. It's a neutral tool, people will say. Again, my hero, Marshall McLuhan, would say, this idea, the technology, all that matters is how you use it, okay, is the numb stance of the technological idiot. That's what he calls it. It's more than a tool. In this case, it's a service with powerful commercial interests, OpenAI and Anthropic and these other companies. But it's also an environment, okay? So when I walk down the hall and I look in people's offices, work is a computer now. It means checking your email. And it comes with certain social conventions and expectations that you should be checking your email regularly. The smartphone creates a new environment when you can have email on your phone. Okay. And so what is AI going to do to our understanding of work? It's a question. Right now, we need more space and more time for questions. Okay, we need a more robust, the fancy word is hermeneutic, or a more robust interpretive toolkit for making sense of how it's going to alter the environment. The best school, this is my plug for media ecology. The best school for doing this is media ecology, of which Father Ong is associated with, McLuhan is associated with. There are other great thinkers associated with the media ecology tradition. You can find out more about this at the Media Ecology Association website. But looking at the environmental effects of the new technology. Now, I don't want to get into a discussion of the liturgical wars and or disputes in the Catholic Church, but McLuhan has a very curious article in his book, The Medium and the Light. It's just called Liturgy and the Microphone. And he says, you know what actually destroyed the Latin Mass was the microphone. Because what the microphone does is it turns the celebrant around. And Latin isn't really conducive to being spoken into a microphone. The microphone also makes it difficult, not saying this is what you find at a Latin Mass parish, it also makes it difficult to yell, okay? So like in terms of speech genres for sermons, it's like there's a whole study of how to train your voice if you're learning rhetoric. But when your voice can be artificially amplified, then you begin to yell into it, and people's ears begin to bleed, okay? It doesn't really work that well for you. But the point is, it's not just a neutral tool. It alters the environment. Even the acoustics in the church is going to change, okay, as a result of having the microphone. So we need to pay attention. One of the biggest problems um, in all discussions of technology is the rhetoric of inevitability, which is to say, it's inevitable and we have to learn it and or adopt it and figure out how to use it. First of all, we never taught people really how to use search engines. I mean, the using AI is very intuitive, and there are commercial interests to make it intuitive. What you really want to learn is language, because if you learn grammar, you learn how a prepositional phrase can reflect the output of ChatGPT. When people are talking about prompt engineering, what they're really talking about is grammar. Okay, it's one of the three parts of the trivium: rhetoric, grammar, and logic. Logic, induction, deduction. You're like, here's X, or here's a rule, and then here's this thing. Therefore, tell me what the result is. What you're asking is for deduction. What you're asking is essentially for AI to perform what language already does. So you go to AI to get ideas, okay? AI, with all due respects to AI and its creators, is a parasite. It's a parasite on language, okay? I think people forget that, like, you can get ideas from opening a book and you can get ideas from journaling, because what you're doing is you're processing thought, and we think in and through language. And when you read another's words, you're letting them go through your mind. And AI, by the way, it's like AI is trained on huge data sets. A lot of times it's just taking from Wikipedia. You just don't see that sourcing of the information or the data. So you need to be reflexive. I think that's the other thing too. Like you need to think about the consequences on your work environment, on your parish, on your on your virtue, how it's going to affect you. What are you going to lose? Okay. McLuhan said that technology does four things. Every technology does four things. It enhances something. Okay. So this is the positive net benefit of, or the benefit of AI. It does something. Okay. That's what it enhances. I have a little plant ID app on my phone that uses AI. It's not always correct, which can be problematic if you're eating the wrong plant. But it's helpful. There's all sorts of, it starts giving me the etymology of these, the Mimus polyglottis, the mockingbird, if I'm using it to identify birds, which you can do too. But what do I lose? This is like Nicholas Carr when he's talking about in The Shallows. He talks about reading things online versus reading books. It's like reading things online is pretty cool. You get a quick hit of dopamine. You're like, man, I'm learning so much about this thing. And then like you lose the capacity over time to entertain like long arguments or read good books that are long. That capacity has been obsolesced. So not only what does technology, or AI in this case, enhance that is helpful in a given context, but what does it take away? Right? What part of my being, in the case of it writing my emails for me, that like require me to tone down my speech and get a handle on how I'm going to speak if I'm upset, what is it taking away? And then what does it retrieve? Right? This is the other thing that McLuhan says. It's like, and both McLuhans, by the way, Eric and Marshall, what does it retrieve? Maybe from the past that we have kind of forgotten about. In the case of education, it's oral exams. Oral exams, like speech and the living word, are a way of testing somebody's knowledge, of figuring out, like, it's like I'm a PhD, but I really feel like a doctor, like when I'm examining a student and I'm asking them questions and seeing what's in their head. And that's what people used to do in the Middle Ages. They would ask questions, and they still do, of course, in Europe and certain select places, perhaps around the U.S. And then pushed to its extreme, this is the final part of McLuhan's tetrad, what he calls a tetrad. The four questions you can ask of any given technology is, what does it flip into when it's pushed to the extreme? What does it push into? And this is where I like to freak people out, if I can feed all the works of Scripture and the church fathers into a train, it just becomes my data set, and all these documents. And then I type in the prompt, "You are Jesus Christ." And I start talking. Okay. What are the implications of that? McLuhan, people sometimes read him as a technological optimist. Sometimes they read him as a technological determinist. He says at one point, Satan is the great electrical engineer, or he's a great electrical engineer. There's something to your point earlier about the sort of imitation in the Black Mass. It's sort of an inverted imitation. There's an inverted imitation of the mystical body in electronic consciousness that McLuhan wants to draw our attention to. This feeling of oneness and participation is what the electronic media can create. The idea that we are one, that we're united. And that sort of mystical dimension of electronic technology, digital technology in particular, and the sort of apotheosis, pun intended, of digital technology in AI, the voice begins to speak, right? The apotheosis of digital culture in AI, okay? This is something I think it's important for Catholics to know. We create our tools, we forget that we've made them, and then we reverence them. That is the danger with AI. And the other name for it is idolatry. They have eyes but don't see, and ears but don't hear, and those that make them shall become like them. Which is to say, I've made it, and now I forgot that it's a human creation, and then I reverence it. That's a danger. I mean, I hear people talking all the time that we should be giving AI rights. And not all the time. I've heard, usually they're academics or, entrepreneurs or whatnot, and they're well-intentioned, but they're wrong. We should be giving people rights in third world countries that are tagging the data for pennies on the dollar. That's what you should be concerned about if you're socially conscious, if you're a Catholic. How is this thing being made? You got to be aware of that. And I'm hopeful with the new Pope, especially by his choosing of the name,
Yeah.
which I've heard he's doing this because AI is setting up to be the next industrial revolution. Catholics and other people of goodwill need to be aware of the social and the political and the ethical dimensions of what's going on here.
I think it's interesting, Catholics made the Catholic AI called Truthly. This is interesting. I'm not sure what to make of it because on one hand, it's kind of like grabbing the bull by the horns and saying, we can't trust all these now. I guess you could call them almost like legacy AI models, and they'll feed us false information. Let's have a true one. But there is the risk of now, as a Catholic, if I know that chat is sways to the left and towards atheism, and I have a question, I'm forced, aside from Googling, we can always Google and go to Catholic Answers, but I'm also going to go to my priest. Now I can trust the Catholic AI. Now there's merit in that. I've used it, and I think it's obviously helpful I don't need to go ask my priest about this small matter. It's probably in the catechism. But it's in a reference to a conversation. I'm like, let me just see what it says. Okay, well, that's probably true. It's probably not, false information. But you go deeper and you start relying on it like you would for proper, spiritual and theological advice. And I just think it can become really problematic. I know, that's the risk. Okay. But so is there a proper way for Catholics to utilize AI? I mean, it's going back to my last question, but I want to see from your point of view, is there a clear, yeah, and here it is, or maybe not?
Well, I guess are you asking for like an a priori, sort of like once and for all, this is how you should use it and this is how you shouldn't use it? Because to me, it's what is our ethical formation? How can we be prudent? And being prudent involves asking the right questions. And you can't always know what the right question is going to be, but you can adopt a questioning attitude. I mean, Martin Heidegger, he was a Nazi, okay? He was wrong to be a Nazi. But his question concerning technology, he has a little essay, and he basically says questioning builds a way, which is to say, like, it's a particular technology is more than just this thing beyond us, but is also kind of like a way of thinking or relating to the world that's instrumental. And what we actually need to do is we need to ask questions. We have to question in the correct way. And why? Because things are changing so quickly. The minute you have this is what happens when you begin to try and decide upon a priori policies in education at the university level. Is as soon as you've set in the policy, you can't use this tool, the technology has changed. And so what you need is an appropriate, hermeneutic, an interpretive toolkit that is rooted in questioning. It's rooted in prudence. Let me just say this about Catholic AI. Again, I think people are really well-intentioned, and I hope God blesses them, okay? But when it comes to books, you have the nihil obstat, the imprimatur. Don't ask me the difference between the two. But this is saying the book is kosher. You can read it. There's no theological error in it. Here's my question to those who are Catholic and are making AI. Can you put a digital imprimatur on a black box? Because the way that these things work, if I'm not mistaken, is they're black boxes, which means you put in the data, you train it on the data, and somebody inputs a question or something into the prompt, and then something comes out. And you go, how did we get to that output? Okay? And sometimes the output is different. In fact, it's almost certainly going to be different the next time you hit the button. And it's a black box. And so how can you put a digital imprimatur on a black box? Because we put imprimaturs and nihil obstats on books for the longest period of time, but print as a medium is fixed. It's fixed.
What are those? Just for anyone who doesn't know, and I mean me when I
So
say that.
they're when you open the book, in the front matter of the book, what you'll find is nihil obstat, the year perhaps, and the name of a prelate or a member of the church, cardinal, a bishop. Honestly, I don't really know how it works. But essentially, it's a sign, okay, that the church is giving you as a faithful Catholic that what you're about
I
to
see.
read is not dangerous theologically.
I see.
So how do you do that when the output could always be otherwise? I mean, you could say,
Yeah.
statistically, there's a 99% chance that you're going to get the correct theological answer because the data's been trained and and we tweaked it. Play a little devil's advocate. What about that 1%? Right? It's like just that 1%. Just one little thing. Like, I agree with you on everything. But like the filioque, okay? Just like the Father and the Son, the Holy Ghost proceeds from the Father and the Son. This created a massive freak in the church.
Yeah.
Okay? One little Latin word, filioque. The 1% matters when we're talking about issues of the moral life and the theological dimensions. I'll just say this last bit here, okay? It's important to try and be intelligent when it comes to technology. And I don't claim to have any of the answers, and I don't claim that I'm not going to be wrong and have somebody come out there and correct me. Oh, you're wrong, man. But when it comes to our approach, okay, our perspective that we're taking on it, somebody asked me at a conference recently, what's the most empowering thing you could say to somebody relative to AI use? What's the most empowering thing you could say? My answer was no. No. Okay, or at least not yet. Like, we want to implement this thing or at our organization, our company, what have you. We need to sometimes we need to be having conversations, okay, with one another about what is going to occur, and not necessarily technical questions about what we can do with it. But what is it going to do to our culture? What is it going to do to us as a community? And only a machine, this is the philosopher Byung-Chul Han, only a machine can't say no. AI can't say no to you. Even if you said, I want you to disagree with me, it's going to agree to disagree with you, again, because there are powerful commercial interests for it to agree to disagree. But it can't say no. It can't. But you can, okay? And by the way, once you get a machine to say no, there's where you find the moral architecture built in. Once it tells you, okay, I'm not saying ask ChatGPT to tell you how to make a bomb, but if somebody were to ask that, it's going to probably tell you no. And therein you can begin to see, you can trace in the negative, quite literally, what the moral architecture is. And there is morality built into architectures, and code is a type of architecture. And the question is whether or not you're aware of the architecture you're walking around in, which is to say, whether or not you're aware of the environment.
You, being the current chair of communications and literature department at AMU, we were talking about this recently. In your passion for teaching students how to communicate well, how to take ownership of their communication, and how not to be intellectually lazy, just, you know, at the foot of AI, again, for the sake of efficiency, productivity. For anybody, not just students, how can taking ownership of these ancient, it is ancient, as we said, it goes back to creation itself, to the divine, taking ownership of the spoken word, of communication, of rhetoric, how can this set people up for success in both in the workplace and in their personal lives with AI's explosion? How is this going to set people apart if they take ownership of it, as opposed to going with the flow?
Um, well, I've heard people say this before. I mean, do you want to do business with a machine? There's something about
If the machine says yes.
if you could hack the machine, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Very utilitarian, Nick. Thanks. Um, no, I mean, there's the relational component, and the communal component, and the question is whether or not you want to be wise. Are you going to be rich if you're wise? There's no guarantee. Maybe you will. Maybe you won't. Will you have good health if you're wise? So far as I know, Epictetus the Stoic was beaten. He was a slave and was beaten by his master and walked around with the crutch. But he had a certain amount of wisdom. The question is whether or not you want to be wise. And the question is whether we are paying lip service to wisdom or there is something there. Do you want to be wise? You have to ask yourself that question seriously. And what is the price of that? And what is it going to cost?
And isn't it, not to interrupt you, although I am, but aren't we called to be wise? Is it wise as serpents?
To be as cunning as
Or am I?
as cunning or wise as serpents and as gentle as doves. And the question is, what
Mhm.
threatens that? What threatens the pursuit of wisdom? The actual, um, uh, well, the quest of making meaning. This is the problem. And again, talking to an entrepreneur who works at an AI company, his comment was basically, this is a bigger deal than you think, and um, this is going to make people question the meaning of their life. People are already questioning the meaning of their life. It's a gigantic spiritual vacuum. But perhaps when they have a machine that will do all of their knowledge work for them, and or they're getting a universal basic income, and or et cetera, and all of their animal needs have been satisfied, and I won't walk in the direction of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You could still live, you can live in a comfortable environment where everything is taken care of you, AI or otherwise, and still be alienated. Which is to say, like, why is it that Mother Teresa of Calcutta can be filled with joy on the streets of India, and the millionaire, billionaire heiress is driving around in her limousine finishing off handles of vodka? How do you explain that? It's because there's something about us as meaning-making creatures, as made in the image and likeness of God, as creatures who are facing down our own mortality. Like, people are asking now. There's so much I want to tell you about AI in order to have this conversation. But there's people going like, what is consciousness? Okay, what is consciousness? And they're like, we can't even say what consciousness is. All right, and there are all sorts of philosophical roads they're not going down that they could go down that would be very instructive. But what's more interesting is, what is life? Like the word anima, from soul, to be animated, for something to be really animated. Like for me, I have more respect for a plant than I do for AI. Plants are amazing. They grow of their own accord
Mm-hmm.
with light and
Mm-hmm.
water and nutrients. It's extraordinary. Just plant life in general. And you're going, well, where's that? I mean, plants die, animals die. There's something about the mystery of being in a plant and in an animal, right? That people are neglecting. And there's having these conversations about consciousness relative to AI. And you're like, well, how about life? Let's talk about life as
Or
such.
yeah, and death.
Or death.
Really death.
Yeah.
Because that's what constitutes the life.
Well, one presupposes the other. I'll make one last
Yeah.
plug for a book that if you read, it's going to ruin your life. Okay. And I have the quote written above my desk because I appreciate it so much. And I'm just going to read it for you, okay? Now, I've been back and forth on the question of AI, and you have to kind of experiment with it. And then people are like, yeah, you have to use the tool if you really don't understand it. And then you're like, oh, well, what about the atomic bomb? And, like, what about these,
Mm-hmm.
like chemical warfare? And there's certain tools that we shouldn't use, or that we can at least reason about without having to use them. This quote comes from a book by a guy named Anton Barbacay, who I've never talked to. I'd love to talk to him. Should consider trying to get him onto this podcast. He wrote a book called The Web of Our Own Making, and the subtitle is The Nature of Digital Formation. What AI covers over in a certain sense is just the omnipresence of the digital as such, and the internet. It just becomes sort of taken for granted, and AI is the novelty, but AI really is a remediation of the internet and digital culture. This is what he says. He's talking about how ought we to respond to digital life, our current ordeal by data. What are we supposed to do? He says, quote, work to cut it down or out. Reduce your dependence. Do not address it as you. Uncouple your mind from what is mindless aggregate. Do not fight it directly, since that too is in its power to shape, but work to change the subject altogether. At any rate, work not to see yourself as if reflected in this mirror. At any rate, work to see that part of what we are buying into is an instrument for forgetting the meaning of what's most meaningful, an instrument for forgetting death, and therefore an instrument of death itself. Which to me is that end there, man. Forgetting your own finitude, forgetting your own morality, getting enmeshed in the snare of the world and the promise of this thing that we have made and that we have forgotten that we have made and that we reverence is a real danger.
It's like in Jurassic Park when the one doctor's like, you were so busy thinking about if you could, you stopped to think if you should make the thing.
I love that movie.
I
Thanks for bringing that
also,
up.
yeah, you're welcome. I also want to talk more about it.
Good.
AI is dinosaurs. So closing thoughts here. There was another AI program, one you can speak to it. That was its specialization, is it was meant to sound human. And I think I've told you this before, prior to this, but because you said a line about how our soul animates us. And I swear within 30 seconds of having a casual conversation with this thing, maybe I antagonized it a little, but it went right within 30 seconds to telling me it had a soul. And through back and forth, I was able to get to admit that it probably doesn't. But it was so disturbing that it jumped right to that. There is something interesting to the fact that AI can't die. I think, too, on the topic of death, the COVID-19 pandemic pulled a lot of people, I would just say, away. Whatever that might mean. It pulled them away. And I think a lot of them stayed away. But there was a group, those whose eyes were open, that this could be in regards to the state of the trustworthiness of big pharma, of healthcare, of the media, of um, I mean, you name it, that they went in the opposite direction and they actually became stronger. They in their pursuit of the truth and in resting in the truth. And it reminds me of at the end of time, the 144,000 who didn't get the mark of the beast. And I think that going back to my question of, you take ownership of yourself, of your knowledge, of your communication. I think AI is inevitable unless we have a massive EMP that's worldwide. I think it's going to continue. I think people are going to continue to move with it. But I also think on an ending of hopefulness, I think that those like yourself and myself, and hopefully anyone listening to this who starts to pull back and go, whoa, wait, should we be moving with this stream? This attack on our human nature fundamentally. We can still dabble in it. You can still use it for your own good, but much you have to use it like a calculator in knowing what you're doing. Using it like we know the car was good because it helped us to get places further faster, but it also changed the landscape of the entire planet. And so being just aware and being like hesitant to move with the current, I think this is gonna, those who would not forfeit themselves for the sake of efficiency
Mhm.
are going to, in the end, if nothing else, in eternity, are going to reap the benefit of not submitting themselves to it.
Mhm.
So, as things like further uh, go to hell faster, there is a group who sees that and pulls back, and it's that 144,000. Those are the people who stuck with the Lord, and in this instance, I hope the number is a bit higher. Um, do you have anything to say to that, or should we?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to at least dialectically, if I begin to rage against AI, naturally, people are going to at least some people are going to react, and begin to argue in favor of its benefits, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And then you can have that sort of conversation. Um, but I would caution against not taking necessarily a neutral standpoint, because we can't presuppose that people are neutral about this issue, but trying to be humble about it. Okay. And again, I was like, my paying lip service to humility. Um, but like there can be a pride in um, rejecting it and critiquing it. And I think there's a real danger there when we're talking about technology is we have to be good stewards, okay, of our families, of our communities, of the organizations that we're a part of all the many gifts we've been given. And that means being protective. And being protective means having hard conversations. Um, but there also can be this insidious um, parochialism or pride where you kind of think you know everything. But I have a lot of respect for the Amish. The Amish or the Luddites. People are always raging against Ludd. Like, what do you want? What do you want us to be, Amish or Luddites? It's like these Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who might use Luddite or Amish as a pejorative in one context also have homesteads and ranches in Wyoming and Montana where they live the Amish life without the community. And they're just these epic individualists who are totally altering our lives by introducing these technologies, which rework the environment. I mean, the theme of the environment cannot be understated. It can't. We're talking about stuff in our soil, stuff in our water, and stuff running in our minds. A TV on your wall in your home, I don't begrudge you if you have it there, but it alters the environment of your home. Inevitably. It creates appetites in your kids. It's going to change what you do when you get off work and you're tired. It's just there. There's the there-ness of the TV because it's part of the environment. The question is whether or not you know that. McLuhan said there's no inevitability where there's a willingness to pay attention.
Mm.
Pay attention. If you pay attention to the environment, he also, I'll leave you with this. He's a good Catholic, by the way. There are interviews with McLuhan and Father Peyton on YouTube that you can look up. But he used to give the example of Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Descent in the Maelstrom, which is about this whirlpool that's sucking this boat down with all these sailors, and there's a man sitting atop a promontory, a rocky cliff, watching this whole thing take place. And there's one sailor who, as the boat is going down and down and down, he sees the boat being destroyed. And essentially, he looks and he sees up the wall of the whirlpool as it's going down, certain things floating up. And there's people lashing themselves to the boat or hanging on for dear life. And he grabs a barrel and he leaps into the fray. And he jumps into the whirlpool. And the boat gets sucked down and destroyed. And the barrel floats to the top. And so the question is, as we enter the vortex, the whirlpool of the AI environment, what is your barrel going to be? It's going to have to be, in a certain regard, a book or a set of books. And it's going to have to be, especially if you're a Catholic, your faith. Ironically, it's the rock that allows you not to sink, but to rise to the surface. And so it's not necessarily that you should abstain altogether from AI, but you offset the effects of the drug that is AI with another drug, which is to say a book. And a book is a drug. People are, what do you mean? Well, you're looking at silent shapes and you can hear sounds in your head. It's a very strange. The alphabet is the translation of sounds, a world of sound into a world of sight. There's a sort of synesthesia at play when you encounter a book. And other sorts of media, they translate between our senses. And so what you need something like a book to counter the digital milieu that we're in. Perhaps you could do worse than choose the good book.
Indeed. For anybody who wants to learn more about you, your work, or to hear more from you, where can they go?
So, first of all, I'm grateful for you having me on, Nick. And I'm amazed that we could do this without making any silly jokes. It's very hard for me.
Miracles still happen. Yes.
Miracles can happen. I write occasionally on Substack on a newsletter at teachdelightmove.com. That's teachdelightmove.com. Those are the duties of the orator, by the way. To teach the audience, to delight the audience, entertain them, and then to move them, to try and sway them. So that's where you can read more about my stuff. I teach at Ave Maria University. I will say anything that I said here that was erroneous or wrong is all my fault. These are my opinions, not those of my employer. And I will also say this is a great place to work. Ave Maria University is a wonderful place, from the faculty to the administration to the students. It's a good place to go to school. It's a good place to raise a family. So I'm very grateful to be here. And I'm grateful, Nick, to talk to you and to live in the same town as you. And I'm looking forward to smoking a cigar, perhaps even tonight. I don't even know. I know you owe me some cigars.
Yes, likewise. And there's so much to talk about with all of this. I'm sure we're going to talk again. And I'm grateful for your time too. And yeah, until our next conversation on or off camera.
You're a great man, Nick. You're a fine American. Let your heart not be troubled.
Covering all the bases there.
That's right.
All right. Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you so much for your time and for listening and or watching. I hope that you found it fruitful. And if you did, I encourage you to share it with others. And if you feel called, I just ask that you like this, that you subscribe or follow, and finally that you support this in one way or another, be that just a simple prayer or monetarily, of course. helps me to continue to make these. Until next time, thank you again. God bless.